I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to Gamekeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the Gamekeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 3, 2, 1.
All right, everybody, here we are. It's the first part of the year. Happy New Year to you, Dudley.
Happy New Year, Bob.
Yeah, we're excited to get this one kicked off. We've got, we're going to talk about something I think a lot of people will be interested in, and then even more people will find interesting, and they will become interested in after we discuss it a little bit. So yeah, we're going to talk about some Native American archaeological sites and artifacts and the legalities of some of that stuff, what you can find, how to know what a site might look like on your property. A lot of guys have, on their hunting property, they may have some old campsites, or we'll discuss all that.
Yeah, so. I think we've all stumbled across something, in our time out in the field, and I'm excited to learn more about all of it.
Yeah, sure thing. So at the end of the table, we got, I hadn't seen Toxie in a couple of weeks. There he is. And Toxie, what's been going on?
Christmas
has been going on.
I've had a busy decorative schedule this particular December.
Yeah, I've seen some cool photos. You kind of went
Toxie
crazy
goes
this year.
all out decorating for Christmas.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
But I'm getting more and more grandkids, so it gets more and more fun.
Yeah, you do love it. You see, he'll pull up in the parking lot and he'll have lights hanging from his rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Only person I've ever seen do that.
Right.
Yeah. So. And then we got Greg Tinsley with a great big smile over here, Greg. We're glad
this is
to
so
have
fun.
you.
This is fun. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
this is great.
Yeah, well, we checked you out, sort of, from downtown.
Yes.
We got to give you back here
Wonderful.
in an hour or so.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, I knew you had an interest in this subject, and I thought you could bring something to the table.
Well, who doesn't? I've been trying to find a stone arrowhead for 63 years, and I haven't. So I'm here. Maybe I'll find one after this discussion.
Yeah.
You'll find something for sure.
All right, guys. So let's talk about kind of move down the blood on the biologic. What Dudley? What'd you see this week?
Well, my buddy B.C. Rogers, his son Ivy.
I didn't send pictures in, by the way. So.
So you have a story?
No, just
okay.
I have blood on a biologic.
Oh, well,
my first time to really get sit in a deer stand. Killed a really big old 6-point, but great deer to kill. Big deer.
Well, I have not seen a picture.
Yep.
Have not heard a word about this. Without a picture, I don't know that, Toxie, we can just take your word for this. Big old 6-point. So.
Yeah. Weighed about 215 pounds, probably 8 years old.
Dang, wow. That is an old deer. Wow.
6-inch base. It's an old deer, but just a 6-point. I think we've seen him before.
By the way, did your plots, did this cold weather?
Gone. It smoked all of them.
Have you ever seen anything like this?
Well, it smoked. I just was telling Dudley, I probably planted 250 to 300 like pansies and stuff in the backyard, in the patio, and I'm a big gardener kind of guy too. And when I got home for the holidays, we've been in Alabama, everything was gone. Every single thing. I mean, in fact, even my azaleas look burnt, like I might lose some of them. I've never seen anything like it. Everything is completely dead. Only thing I will say, in the last day or two, you can see little stuff looks like clovers and grasses coming back in those food plots. But it smoked everything everywhere.
Devastating. Unbelievable.
Yep. Never seen anything like it before.
Yeah.
What about the winter wheat crop guest?
Oof.
Doesn't look so great.
I bet.
Not good.
Dudley, so you were saying on the blood on the
Yeah,
biologic.
so one of my high school buddies, he's actually in the outdoor industry, him and his wife Kim have the Wren and Ivy, the really fancy leather goods and more. Their son Ivy got his first deer.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Speaking of Ivy, well, congratulations.
Oh,
him,
yeah, yeah.
But speaking of Ivy, Day Ivy, Ken
Yeah.
Ivy's daughter killed a really nice buck.
Yeah.
I think it's on the mossyoak.com page. She wrote a little story about it. It's called tailgate talk. So,
Yeah.
So there's the picture. And I said, well, there's a lot of blood in that picture, Doc.
You said butt was blood on the deer.
Yeah,
It's a good one.
That's for sure. Hey, and I also want to, Hunter Hawley's son, Grayson.
He did.
What?
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
awesome.
Boy, he's a cute
Who does
little
it?
old young thing.
He is. He is a pistol. He really is. He is a chip off the old block, and he killed his first buck.
That's awesome.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, congrats, Doc. I didn't know you had.
I just got started good.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's an old deer. That's really cool. Does anybody else have anything? Greg, you got anything?
Really don't. The ducks have been kind of sparse, so we're
bet.
just kind of hanging on.
Now, I haven't properly introduced our guest yet, but do you? Is there anybody in your life that has just recently, in the last week, done something phenomenal like what Toxie thinks he has done?
I did not say it was.
Usually,
You ask about blood.
usually by now, Caroline has gotten a large one, but she's just gotten doe, which she's just gotten the meat so far.
There was nothing wrong with
She
that.
got a new lens for her camera.
Oh,
So
cool.
she's been shooting with her camera.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think I've seen some duck shots on the social
Oh, well,
media.
they did have a great duck hunt last weekend.
Oh, wow.
And a relative from South Carolina was with us, and Caroline walked in and said, we waxed them.
Shot him in the face.
Yeah, that's good.
Fantastic.
So, moving right along, Richie, do we have who is this episode brought to you by?
Today's episode is brought to you by the Furminator, a great partner of ours. Just
Love
want to
them.
talk about, they've got all different land management implements that a gamekeeper needs.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of food, we've been talking about food plots last
yeah.
couple. They've got a great product.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
And they sure do. I would encourage everybody to it's a new year. The guest we had on last week emphasized about doing things right. And, and a Furminator can go a long way toward helping you do
It's
a
actually
food plot
so
right.
versatile, and it's so simple and effective. The chances of you investing in one and it running really good for many years, 10, 20 or longer is so high, so much higher than all the moving parts on some other things that plant similarly. So it's a really, really cool food plot implement. And quite honestly, other stuff you could plant too.
Sure. They've got cultipackers, and they've got a little drill now. So check out Furminator.com. Is there anything else, Rich, before we get on?
Well, one thing I'd like to mention here, last week, did you guys talk about Go Wild?
Yeah, we did that new app, the new social media app, guys. Y'all,
Yeah.
Greg, you missed it, but it's called Go Wild. It's a place that hunters can go and not be censored, so to speak, and so it's new, and we're trying to encourage people to check that out. It's good. Yeah,
It's
Okay,
wild, too.
Yeah, it's Go Wild. Yeah. So thank you, Richie. So look, let's turning my attention. We've got a guest. We're really excited. You're highly recommended. We've got Miss Jessica Crawford. And as I understand it now, that you've been to school a long time to study archaeology, and you have a real passion for history. And whether it's today, we're going to talk about Native American history, first American history. We've got a lot of questions to ask, but I think your interest. Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself to get us started, please?
Sure. I grew up in Marks, Mississippi, which is the northwest corner of Mississippi, over in the Delta, and was always interested in the past. All through high school, I said I wanted to major in historic preservation. I wanted to be the one that scratched down to the original coat of paint in a historic home. But eventually I got interested in what's outside of an old house, an old structure, and I went to Ole Miss, got a degree in English, and while I was working on my English degree, I spent a lot of time playing also. It was a while before I even got the English degree, but I got married and married a farmer from my hometown, and he dropped me off in a field one day. He was going to check a levee or something, and I found, what I called at the time an arrowhead, but it was actually a large spear point. And I'd never really thought much about Indians or Southeastern Indians. It was all historic before then, and I got really interested. I couldn't believe I'd found this perfect point, and that somebody made thousands of years ago. Well, first I wanted to know how old it was. It's the first question most people want to know is how old this is. And so I started doing research and volunteered with the local Archaeological Society for a while, and went back to Ole Miss to get a degree and get my master's degree in anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology, which is what you need to be an archaeologist.
So where I'd like to start this, it's obviously you're very qualified for. Dudley and I have a lot of questions, and I know Greg does as well. And Toxie's actually, a large landowner who's got, it's just in a part of the world where everybody's curious, and we want to protect things. So I want to start by talking about the legalities. If you've got a property somewhere, obviously, as a gamekeeper, you're trying to keep poachers off the property. But what we've come to learn is there are guys they're not out there looking for your deer or your turkeys. They're out there looking for what artifacts may be there. And that's a much bigger deal than what most people realize.
Much bigger.
And so could you talk a little bit about that? And then could you please talk about the legalities of surface hunting or if you have a mound, what can and can't you do? Or ethically, what should and should you not do?
Well, if the first thing is to have whatever you're doing have landowner permission, and you cannot surface collect. Anybody who does anything outside, even just working in a garden, odds are you might find an artifact, a prehistoric artifact or historic, an early 19th century or 18th century artifact. But you can surface collect with landowner permission all you want. You should never dig. That ruins what we call the context of the artifact. If you take an artifact out of where it was, the exact spot where it was dropped, and we don't know where it was found, I can't tell you how many collections I've looked at where there was this great point or a stone bead or something really interesting, a spectacular example of an artifact. Where did it come from? And that if we don't know, that doesn't tell us much. So it's important to keep up with where you found everything if you're surface collecting, and you should never dig. And it is completely illegal to surface collect of any sort on state or federal land. Even when you're out on one of the reservoirs, a lot of times people find things there, but that's federal land, and you're looking at federal laws that protect that. So you cannot even surface collect there, and which is difficult for a lot of people. I know they say, well, if I don't pick it up, somebody else will, but still, it's federal property, and those are stiff charges. Every state has a state archaeologist, and almost every state has local archaeological societies. These are people who work with professionals that'll teach you how to keep up with what you find. You can get a site number from your state archaeologist. These are not made public. They're put on a large state map. And if you find an artifact, you can contact the state archaeologist. They'll mark it on a map and give you a site number. And that map is only available if, say, someone wants, these are important because someone might want to put a road through your property years from now. We looked at, this happened around Tunica in Tunica County when the casinos all of a sudden went in, and nobody ever thought there would be casinos there. And all of a sudden they're wanting to put casinos in, and there are mound sites all over the place. And so these will be recorded so that when someone gets ready to do something that will disturb this site, it's in the database and it has to be dealt with. And of course, before these kinds of projects, people go out, companies are required to hire archaeologists to go out and test and make sure they're not going to disturb something that belongs to the public. And so when you find something, you should record your site with the state archaeologist. They're not going to tell anybody else. And that way you can put your site number on that artifact, and you know that people are living there. We've got like as many as about 12,000 years of prehistory in Mississippi, probably older. I'm thinking about the oldest radiocarbon dated site in Mississippi is about 12,000 years old. And so that's near Amory. It's called the Hester site. And, that's a lot of years of history. And there weren't people in every part of the country at that time. There's different time periods, but you can put a date on the artifact that you find and know people were there at that time period. So it's writing our history.
So one of the things, and I'll let these guys start asking questions, but when I kind of sit back and think about it, there were Native Americans from Florida up into Canada, from the Atlantic coast to the West Coast. I mean, anybody listening to this in the United States, there were Native Americans in that area in some way, shape, form, or fashion. And we've probably found an arrowhead in a field when we're working a food plot. And these guys, I think of them as the first gamekeepers, because when you hear some of the stories, and I want to ask you about this, but we hear about them burning and doing. So they were managing the landscape for wildlife, and that's just fascinating to me. And I know some of that is so hard for us to understand, and a lot of it is, what you guys have learned. But when you look at a map, the United States, so many rivers, towns are Indian names, and they may have been kind of modified into a more English version, but the Indians had a huge impact.
Oh, no doubt.
And should have.
Yeah,
rightfully so.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, when your livelihood depends on what's out there, you're in tune with what happens out there, and in all the years of prehistory that we have, they were there to see the repercussions of bad land management, or how human actions affect the environment. They learned, and they're much more in tune with nature and rivers and the land than we are. They knew the sky better than we do. I mean, it was a somewhat different environment. It was a lot like it is now, other than the Pleistocene, when there were mammoths and mastodons and things like that. And river courses have changed. The land's been modified by the environment. But their livelihoods depended on being able to count on certain animals in certain places at certain times. And the same thing with plants. They would go to a certain area when certain nuts would be falling, or they could gather. They followed the ducks. They were in the delta, to hunt ducks. So they moved around, and they were also, they also stayed in one place often, and they would exchange. We find marine shell all the way up in the Midwest, and a friend of mine from Mississippi State recently sourced native copper from the Great Lakes region to a site on the Gulf Coast, to a site down by Gulfport.
It's amazing how that works. Do you have any idea, like something like that? Does that change hands many times, or was there just like a people that were just willing to walk that far?
I think it was both. I think small amounts changed hands, and I also think it was loaded into canoes and sent down the river. We find Burlington chert and massive amounts of it at a site right outside of Clarksdale, and I think that came right down the Mississippi River, and it's big pieces. So somebody didn't just throw it on their back and start walking, but it's what we call trade networks, and they got around. We sort of primitize them in our minds, but these people don't stay in one place ever.
No, they're curious, just like we are.
They've got what we want. Let's give them some of what we have, and vice versa.
So, there's just so many questions, but like, what were some of the most prized possessions of the natives?
Well, it depends on time period. Things we call exotic materials that, in one area it might be some marine shell that was engraved. They would sometimes make these shell gorgets. They would cut circles out of a big shell and engrave it. And we've got, one of my favorites is the woodpecker gorget. It's a piece of shell that's, about 3 or 4 inches or so across. And it's got an ivory-billed woodpecker motif engraved on it. And
That's
it's just,
amazing.
and you see that ivory-billed woodpecker in a lot of art, in pottery, and it's just, that's what the ivory-billed is one of my favorites. It's just,
all we have left is the pileated.
Yeah, which is pretty impressive too, but it just makes me think, God, the ivory-billed must have been amazing. And a friend of mine who's Chickasaw was at a museum. I think he was at the Peabody recently, and they opened the drawer of the few ivory-billed, the mounted specimens that they still have, and he was like, "These are our brothers."
That's crazy. We were talking about taxidermy last week, so
Yeah.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah. Greg, have you got a question?
The site in Amory, what was recovered from that one, the 12,000-year-old site?
Lots of stone tools, but especially in the southeast, we don't have very good preservation of things like wood or material, things like that. Every now and then in a cave, you'll find something that old, a cave in Alabama or Arkansas, but it's mostly stone tools, projectile
Scrapers,
points,
knives.
yes, scrapers and points.
Was there any
adopted
pottery in
point.
that?
No, pottery was not invented until much later. So they were using likely skins. And then at some point they were using stone bowls, soapstone bowls. The sources there were some sources in Georgia and Alabama. The same site that had the copper from the Great Lakes region also had some stone bowls.
When did the technology for clay bowls come in?
Pottery dates to, it's about 5,000 years old, yeah.
Recently?
Yeah, pretty recently.
Yeah.
And it actually, the earliest pottery we know of in the southeast was found in an area called, around Augusta, Georgia. There's a site there, an island called Stallings Island, and it has some of the oldest pottery in the southeast on it. It was in my textbooks, in grad school as the oldest pottery is from that area, and that island is owned now by the organization I work for, the Archaeological Conservancy.
That's good news.
Terrific.
Yeah, and it was heavily looted, and when I say looted, I mean people snuck over there and dug in the site, and when it was donated to us, it looked like a moonscape. These massive holes had been dug in it, and for things that were, and this is another prized artifact, that one thing these people were looking for are engraved bone pins made out of, I think they're usually made out of turkey bone. They're called awls, AWLS, and they can be used for sewing as cloak pins and things like that, but they're really intricately engraved and they're preserved there, and that's one of the things these people were digging for, are these pins, bone pins.
So can we kind of pause right there and then think back kind of broadly across the landscape? How important was white-tailed deer to the Native Americans back in their time?
Oh, extremely. I mean, it's the main source of protein, at least certainly in the southeast. I mean, you have bison, but here that was the main source of protein. Of course, they hunted turkey. We find remains there of what they ate, food remains. They ate everything. I mean, from down to lizards, snakes, even great blue herons, which I don't know where you get meat off a great blue heron. Wow. But it's primarily, you have white-tailed deer, and we can look at the bones or the zooarchs, people who are specialized in archaeology and identifying animal bones, can look and tell, how old the deer was and, what season, what time of year, usually. And a lot of times we'll see, at mound sites, we'll see, when we say we see evidence of feasting or something like that, we can tell that they were eating the best parts, prime cuts of deer at this mound site. You don't find any other, you don't find the legs or any, you find they were eating the tenderloin and the backstrap, all the good stuff for their fancy parties, I guess, the feasting at mound sites. But that was extremely important, and bear too. But deer, I think, and of course, the antlers were tools. That's how they made their stone tools. That's how you pressure flake and knock a flake off a stone, usually is with deer antler.
Yeah, there's some Facebook groups where people flint nap.
Yeah.
And it's really impressive how good people are.
Mm-hmm. There's some great.
Now we have modern
nappers.
technology to make, better tools and things like that, but it's fascinating, and I've enjoyed trying to learn all the lingo, and I don't need another hobby. But
so most of these that we refer to them as arrowheads that we find, surface find, are actually spear points. Can you kind of explain the atlatl and the bow and arrow,
Sure.
what we might be looking at?
Yeah, it's, arrowhead is kind of a catch-all term for the point on the end of a weapon, but also, usually the points that are about an inch long, if they're much longer than an inch, maybe 2 inches, they're probably spear points, because if you put, and y'all know this, if you put a big point on the end of an arrow. When you shoot it, odds are it's too heavy. It's going to go down. And we only have evidence of the bow and arrow didn't make it really to the southeast until about AD 700. So it's not, until then, there's a longer history of people hunting with the atlatl, which is a spear that is thrown with a spear thrower. And those are usually what the larger points were on. And of course, there are a lot of, we often call them PPKs, which means projectile point knife. A lot of these were just tools, knives, that sometimes you can see a little flake out of the side. And a friend of mine calls them oyster openers. But, those, I think those were just tools, multi-purpose tools, because you had bone, stone, and wood, and shell. Sometimes shell was used as a tool, but stone, if you want to really cut something, stone is going to be the best option.
It's amazing how sharp those things can be when somebody knows how to pressure flake them. But Taxi, I'm looking at you, where you kind of grew up hunting down around Choctaw Bluff. There had to be a lot.
Reportedly, one of the great mysterious sites they've always looked for was down there, and I think it still never has been verified. Mulvilla.
Oh, Mulvilla, yeah.
And so to this day, I don't think it's been positively identified where. Now, the hearsay was right below where right there where the mossy oak tree was. But to my knowledge, and you would have an update, they never quite figured out where this, incredible site was. You could speak to it.
There's a team with University of West Alabama, and Ashley Dumas is working with Jim Knight, who's retired from the University of Alabama. They're close to finding it. I've helped them. I just went and volunteered for a week or so this past summer in Marengo County.
Right.
On land, and they're finding Spanish metal, what we know is Spanish metal. And I think they're certainly close. They don't think that they have found the actual village yet,
right.
But I think they're close. And it's really some of the most exciting research going on, at least in the Southeast now, is to watch this group. She's giving a talk in Mobile about it, I think, next week. But you can go. It's really, they're doing great work, and it's
so what I heard about it, correct me if I'm wrong now, that this massive site was a city that would have been compared to like Atlanta back in the day, that it was just a major, had a lot of people living there.
There were a lot of people living there. It was Chief Tuscaloosa's village, where the name, the city of Tuscaloosa, that was his village, and he had a battle with DeSoto there, and it was burned. And the numbers, there are different numbers for how many Indians were killed there, but the site will be a large burned Indian town.
I wonder why it's so hard to find. Seems like somebody would have passed down through the years.
You would think, and that's a good question, because a place a burned town that big, they were living in houses that we can still see evidence of them, especially when those houses burned. They were made of this mud. Most of them were made of this mud called daub. They were wattle and daub structures. And so you can walk out in a field and see daub, if these houses burned prehistorically. So this would be a massive burned village. And some people used to think the town of Cahaba, right outside of Selma, Old Cahaba, that's on top of a big Indian village site, but the dates aren't right. But a lot of people used to think that was Mobile, but that's been, I think, pretty much checked off the list. And there are several things that need to be found to prove, and there'll always be people who doubt, but it's amazing that it hasn't been found yet.
As a young guy down there, did y'all see and find artifacts? Or
not much.
Was it even on your radar, really?
Not really, to be honest with you, because we just never ran into them, and it was all timbered, and so it's pretty rare just almost completely. In fact, I'm pretty sure there and a few other places, probably in the '60s, that was the first place there were ever a food plot. Yeah, down there they called them green patches, but or food. I think they called them food plots, but they wouldn't even allow people hunting around it. But nobody there that hunted ever like planted them. It was just somebody who worked for the family. And so there was never, my point was there's never any bare dirt anywhere to come across stuff. So we never did.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm sure it
that's-
was abundance of it somewhere down there, but I just never did.
That's the difference in finding, if you look at our site database for the whole state, most sites that are recorded are in the Delta where land is farmed. And we just don't have, nobody's out doing surveys or looking at the ground when you've got a lot of timber. So that's one reason why, we have a good idea of where the village of that DeSoto, when DeSoto crossed the river into Arkansas, and he met the natives there. We think we know where that was, and it was easier to find that place because it's in the Arkansas Delta and it's been farmed. So it's just you have to walk and dig shovel tests if you're in an area that's got a lot of timber or pasture. And so that's what they're doing in Marengo County is they're walking plowed fields, and that's what when I helped, I went and we just did transects walking across fields, but they had to be plowed. When when you do one that's got cows in it or it's in the timber, it's a lot harder to find evidence. So it's probably hidden in a place that has just not been heavily farmed.
Yeah, that's the only reason. It would have, as much as it's been sought after, and actually some other stuff too. It would just about have to be in a remote, some large landowner, heavily timbered, hadn't been messed with, or it would have been discovered by now.
Yeah.
And that's the key to finding these sites. Some of the first things they did when they started looking was just have a public meeting. Bring what you found. Have you found anything? Could you bring it here and let us look at it? And, it's getting help from the public and private landowners. And there's some landowners that won't let this group survey their pasture, because they hear these, archaeologists will take your land.
Take it away
from
Right,
you.
exactly. I have actually heard people talking about not cooperating because, and that was a long time ago, I don't think they were doing anything wrong. They were just fearful. They're just like, there's a fear, they find something, government's going to take my land away from me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's rightfully so that they would fear that. I'm sure that's a false assumption for sure.
It is.
Because listening to her, that would mean it would be protected is what it would mean.
Yeah. And down the road, it can protect your land. I've had people call me and say, they want to put this road through my land and I don't want them to, and I've got sites out here. Can you help me stop it? And I said, well, are they recorded sites? Well, no, the archaeologists wanted to come out here years ago, but I wasn't going to let them because that's the government. And I thought, well, if you would let them record your sites, it would be on the map now, and I could help you a little bit more. But very few things. Archaeology is so low on the priority list when it comes to money and business and things like that. Archaeology rarely stops anything or takes anything away from someone. Now, there are laws that have to be followed, and it changes when you're dealing with human remains.
Yes.
But even then, you call the state, and if you do the right thing, you may just have to slow down and let it be professionally dealt with, and then you can keep going.
Yeah.
So, I have no idea, but I'd always been told if you came across bones that you had to just leave it alone completely and no more picking up anything or touching it or whatever. That was just immediately make it, whatever, illegal to.
Human remains are protected by law, but it's still your land,
Right.
It's
So could a landowner that all of a sudden discovered a bone in some plowed up ground, he's been picking up, spear points or arrowheads for years, does he have to completely stay out of that then, or can he still pick up a point, or is it just don't touch the bones?
We can't disturb a burial,
Right.
or take anything from the burial. And if it looks like there's a whole cemetery.
Yes.
You
So I hate to say this, I don't talk about our places much, but there is a place very distinctly in Indian Mountain. It goes off into some woods. And sadly, of course, where it's in a field, it's before we ever got the land, it was farmed a good bit. So that, and you could usually find something out there. But just on in the woods where some bigger timber, it kind of bleeds off into there. There was very distinctly about 6 foot long, 3 foot wide rectangles, sunken in maybe 6 inches to another foot, just like all in the woods. And it just made me cringe because I know exactly what that was. On top of that, you could just see the surface of the ground everywhere was like brim beds where it's sunken in little circular places. And it just been completely robbed, including the graves.
So
It was
so it'd been
sad.
devastating. People had stolen
absolutely.
stuff out of it.
Absolutely. No other possible explanation for that,
Yeah, and they know people who do that sort of thing know where these sites are, or they know how to find out.
So a guy, you can look at a map, I suppose, and they wanted high ground along creeks or rivers or what. I'm not trying. Let me rephrase the question. So if you're a landowner and you've got a big creek, is there a way that you can say, you know what, I probably need to. I bet this area right here where this creek runs into this bigger creek on the higher side of this might be a quote unquote site.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Is that how you go about looking for something?
If an archaeologist is going to do a survey of a whole area, and they do that sometimes, those are the most likely places. The good place to live then is the same place that we live now. A high spot near the river, especially his early history. In the 1800s where towns were built were often on Indian settlements. I know the town that I live in. So it's usually high spots, sandy areas on a body of water or at the confluence of two bodies of water, and that's just common sense.
So water was extremely important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But so going back to what Toxie said, if you're a landowner and somebody is digging or what can you do? Who can you call that will come and help you?
You can call your state archaeologist. In this state, it's the Mississippi Department of Archives and History, and sometimes they'll often refer you to We've got several game wardens who are trained to recognize things like that, looting, and there's some telltale signs. A lot of times, if you find digging tools hidden somewhere, or some have told me recently, because I have to look when I visit our sites, the sites that the Archaeological Conservancy owns. I look for things like, in the trash, are there battery packages, battery wrappers? And a lot of them do this at night, so they'll be changing out batteries and things like that. So, piles of dirt, and a lot of times they set up black visqueen tents and dig. They used to do that at a site near Clarksdale a lot, and not backfill. And then the farmer would break an axle when his tractor drove through it afterward in this site, and that it still happens a lot. But if you see piles of dirt and just a lot of trash and things like that, you can call Archives and History, and they'll usually contact a game warden. But there's an escalated effort to deal with that on private property, because on private and public property, it is a lot worse than a lot of people realize. And sometimes it's legal. You can look on. There are people that have YouTube channels, and they'll take a camera out, and sometimes I feel like they've probably got permission from the landowner to just dig and dig and they pull out these beautiful points. But these beautiful points are like, say 1 or 2 feet beneath the surface, and they're in context. And gosh, there's so many of those we would know so much more about those points and about that site if it had been left there. And I understand that it's fun to find something, but I loved it. That's what got me into this. And for a long time, even after I became an archaeologist, I thought, wow, it would be really hard to give something up if I found something really cool somewhere. But it's, now I'd rather have the knowledge than the artifact. And that's the way archaeologists feel. They'll get excited about somebody's private collection, and they may ask to borrow it long enough to photograph it and sketch it. But no archaeologist I know wants to keep that stuff. We don't have a place to put it. Nobody wants to take it away. We've learned so much from people being generous with what they found. I couldn't have written my master's thesis if not for artifact collectors.
Yeah, I was thinking I was trying to look up my family tree about a month ago on the computer, and What would it be like if a lot of that was blank spaces because those records were messed with? It's just a different perspective, but it's the same human people.
So Jessica, isn't there an underworld that's out there digging in these places like what we've described, but they're selling these artifacts?
Yeah, there's big money in it, and it's underworld, but it's also pretty out in the open. I mean, if you find, some people will pay a lot of money for a certain type of point, but I've seen so many fakes, and it is a sketchy world. I mean, I don't want to make people who buy and sell it, but you just don't know the real history. And there are also flint knappers who are really good, and they fooled archaeologists. And just because something has a paper with it that says it's legit, I know a lithics expert, another archaeologist, who recognized points that were stolen from Ole Miss in a collector's collection when he was looking. I mean, and this was
that's awesome.
a really a specific point that, and Ole Miss used to not have great security in the 1970s, and Sam was like, man, that was Ole Miss's point in that collection. I know it was, and we do, especially the paleo points, some of the earliest points. We have a database where where archaeologists keep up with these points, and they're photographed and sketched, and you can recognize a point by the flaking.
It's almost like a
flake scars.
fingerprint.
Mm-hmm.
So the story from way back in the day, this is Bob Dixon that started this. He was calling on an account and he was talking about this guy had a bunch of artifacts. And, it was just one of those career, love to collect, just there were a lot of people obsessed with it. But he said, something about from West Point. He said, oh, wow, one of the richest sites in the country is down there. Oh, my gosh, the black market people just – and he said, you got to be kidding me. Oh, yeah, and he was describing it to him. Well, guess what? It's right by your hunting club.
Yeah.
And you know where it is.
Yeah.
So he said they will park, and I actually had a place I leased right there. They will park on your railroad tracks, walk about a mile. How far down to the creek? Mile?
Yeah, probably. At
mile
least.
and a quarter.
Yeah.
Cross that creek on the railroad track, then walk through the mud another over half a mile to get to this site. And they work all night, and they come back out, and they'll leave right before it gets daylight. They do it at night all the time. And I was thinking, I've seen trucks parked there I never could explain or whatever. Maybe it's telling the truth. But I never thought a lot more about it because I just don't get absorbed in that kind of stuff. Well, not long after that, the federals busted a bunch of people down there on that exact mound. Yeah. And I mean, they caught them red-handed and so forth. And of course, the guy farmed that down there at the time. This big, huge mountain was not farmed. So it had grown up some trees and stuff. But evidently there was a treasure trove there people were going for. Here's the thing that'll get you. So they made a big deal out of it. It was in the papers. It was everywhere. These guys busted. The federals caught them, fines, jail, all this stuff. 2 days later, someone got in it again. That's how bold they were.
Well, have you ever heard me tell the story?
And I just want to say, you got to walk like 2 miles to get to this. That's how bad they wanted to get in there.
Yeah. So I don't know, Tyke, if I've ever told you my story that where I encountered some of them.
Well, where you hunt, I would be surprised if you did at least a long time ago. I haven't heard a word in 25 years.
This is 25 years ago. Yeah. One afternoon, I snuck off of work. Forgive me. I remember it like it was
lightning
yesterday.
Strike me if I criticize that one.
But so I go to there's a deer I was trying to kill, and I snuck over there about 3:30.
Was that the fake deer?
And no, it was not.
Okay, go ahead.
So when I go to cross, there's these railroad tracks. When I go to cross them, I look down and I can see 4 or 5 guys that are walking down the tracks toward me, and they are filthy. I put my binoculars up and I look because they're on us at this point, and I look at them, and I'm standing there with an orange hat on and binoculars and looking at them, and they are filthy. And I start seeing they're in a line, but then one drops off, and then the other one drops off this side, and they kind of come back up, and so they're about 300 yards away, and I'm thinking I want to go kill this deer, but I need to wait until then they don't find out what's going on. So I stood there, and they walked all the way up there to me. And they went into this, man, we are so glad to see you. We are lost. We parked our truck and had a friend drop us off at the Tibby Creek, and we walked the creek looking for old bottles, and we've been walking all day long, and we don't know where we are. And I didn't know what was going on, and I was like, well, let me just, if you'll walk this way, you'll get to town. And I had no idea. But that's what those guys, they were coming out from digging and that. And
they were peeling off the tracks to drop their stash off.
That's what I'm told.
And then they were probably going to come back and get it later.
Yeah.
Definitely not old bottles.
No. I can remember thinking, what a bunch of, who wants to go walk that far looking for old bottles?
No, they'd be going to old well sites and stuff for that, probably.
But I did encounter them. And sometimes I think about that and I wonder, what all might have been going through their mind when they walked up on me, because some of these guys, I'm told, are some pretty unsavory characters.
We had DNR was working on an investigation that was related to the island, Stallings Island in Augusta, and it was a massive operation with DNR arresting a lot of people, including someone who was supposed to be looking after our site, unfortunately. But he told me, he said, I used to think nothing of driving by myself to a site that the Conservancy owns, hop out and go in the woods and check on this mound that we own or something like that. And he said, you just do not go alone anymore, because some of these people, he talked about walking up on this one guy. He said, I fought with him. He said, I thought I was going to have to shoot him. We rolled around. And if his backup hadn't shown up, and this guy had dug all in, I think, one of the national forests, and he walked up on him and he said, a lot of it are, a lot of people are they're also cooking meth out there, or a lot of, I've been told that a lot of people on meth will, just to get money and just because they need something to do, will just go and hunt artifacts. And if they find something, they know the collectors that will pay them big money for a whole Motley Point or a whole Dalton or Clovis.
I've got a Motley.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well, those are great points.
Found it at my farm. Yes, I know exactly where.
Good. So, he said, do not go by yourself anymore, because some of them really, you don't know what shape their mind is in, or they do not want to witness. And it's just, it's dangerous now. And so, and I've thought about that. I don't do that anymore. Used to think nothing of it.
I want to give a shout out to our game wardens. I mean, I don't know them everywhere. I know Mississippi and Alabama. The most versatile law enforcement people on the planet.
They are.
I mean, I just saw where our local buddy here that's so good, and a team of other ones, 7.5 hours through like whatever wilderness areas to track down a federal fugitive or whatever.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get all the details, but it was like 7.5 hours, and they're on drug busts, and they're on. So I know that's a little off the point, but that's who we would call around here. They're the ones that asked. In fact, they would ask me, if you I want to go in there and look and see if there's been any activity on this or that. They really are the most versatile of all law enforcement. Yeah. And I mean, I just hope
they are.
I know people. Someone likes shoot over limit of doves and they hate game wardens or whatever. And I'm not picking on anybody particularly, but thank your lucky stars for them is all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Regardless of whether you might have a guy locally you don't like or can't get along with or whatever, it is the greatest thing that ever happened to North American wildlife is our law enforcement.
Yeah.
It was game wardens involved in the people who were arrested in this area on that mound. And I met one of them's wife the other day, and I was like, tell him thank you, because a lot of them are like, I used to just write tickets for ducks, and now I'm looking for pointy rock, people stealing pointy rocks, but they've learned the laws and they know what to look for, and they're educating the archaeologists on what a looted site looks like, and they will go after them.
Well, there's better, and with better technology is better, easier to. I mean, even satellite surveillance might show up something for them, because they can access that kind of stuff. But even the cameras we use for deer hunting can help you catch people.
Yeah, we've got them on several sites. I was getting alerts on my way here from a mound site in Louisiana that we own that has a camera.
Wow.
On it.
So Jessica, you can say when we think about somebody looting something like that, it kind of is. We find it offensive ourselves. I mean, when we have no ownership in that Toxic does when some property he owns. But how do the Native American people feel about that? Are there things being done? Are they having meetings and organizing themselves? Or
they're more active than ever. And in Mississippi, in the Southeast, we had the Trail of Tears, so a lot of them were removed, but there are still some here. And then those who were removed, the tribes that were removed to Oklahoma, are extremely involved now more than ever. A lot of them have their own archaeologists. They're constantly involved, and they work with the state to take care of mound sites, and also returning artifacts that have been taken from graves. There's repatriation. NAGPRA is a law that requires human remains and associated objects to be returned to tribes that have a connection to them. So although every day we don't see them, they're extremely active and have really strong feelings too, and it is offensive to them. And it may be a 4,000-year-old site. It's not something we consider like a Choctaw tribe or Chickasaw tribe, but they're certainly their ancestors, and they feel extremely protective. And it's still sacred to them. These sites are.
Just trying to put stuff in perspective. I've got a baby chair from the 1800s that's in my family, and that's a prized possession. And it's no different. It's more. It's a bigger deal.
Yeah. Well, it's this. It's the same. It's their history too, and especially with these that were removed. We have a partnership. We've had a partnership with the Chickasaw Nation for a long time, and they gave the Archaeological Conservancy a grant to purchase a Chickasaw village, a 1700s Chickasaw village right outside of Tupelo. And the Chickasaw Governor Anatubby visited his first visit there. He looked at someone who came with him and said, "I feel it." And I've been there before when they visited and said, "So this is where they lived." And this was not that, just a few hundred years ago. This is, the early 1840s, the late 1830s, that this was their homeland. And so to come back and see where their houses were, and to know that their graves are often disturbed, either intentionally or unintentionally, is painful. But they do come back, and especially the Chickasaw in the Tupelo area, and this part of Mississippi, they're extremely active, and there's a lot. They're going to build a heritage center in Tupelo, a Chickasaw Heritage Center, which is, it's the only case I know of a tribe returning to a homeland from which they were expelled and working with the people who ended up with their homeland to create a heritage center.
I drove by that site I think it's off the Trace. On the way to a soccer game a few weeks ago, and it's a really cool site. There's a lot of natives. It's prairie-esque. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be a great educational.
Even the
tool.
white guy in me could feel it. You really can.
So, Ms. Jessica, as let's talk about how someone, I'll use Toxie, for example.
Careful.
A landowner that might have a mound or two on his property. You were telling us that there are ways that you can deed it, or where the Conservancy kind of takes care of those. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, a lot of times landowners, they're taking care of the land at the present, and I've talked to many who said, "Look, my kids are going to get this. They're going to love it just like I did." But we don't know what the future holds, and in some cases, what the Archaeological Conservancy does, we're set up like the Nature Conservancy, except we preserve archaeological sites, and people join the Archaeological Conservancy for $30 a year, and what we do is we talk to landowners and try to convince them to either sell or donate their archaeological sites to us. And what we do, we use these sites, we just bank titles away for educational and research purposes in the future. Not every mound site is going to be a state park or a national park. And it doesn't even have to be a mound site. If it has archaeological research potential, we have a plantation, we have Civil War forts, we have colonial forts, and Indian villages and mound sites. And, all those sites do have information. They have the ability to write a page of our history. They just might not be part of a park. And so we hold title to them, and we allow archaeologists to do research on them. They do have to submit a research design. No one is allowed to completely excavate a site. We're starting to work with tribes on how we manage them, but we try to manage the sites in a way that protects the archaeology, and it's just the same basically as when the owner turned it over to us. We've got mounds in the middle of fields, and we'll let a farmer continue to farm a site if he's not deep plowing, if he no-tills, and we just leave the mound and trees. We have other sites, nobody watches land better than somebody that's got the hunting lease on it. So a lot of our sites are leased. Sometimes the landowner will say, well, I've grown up hunting here. I want to continue to hunt. So we'll say, okay, your family has the hunting lease for the next 75 years. And I might go visit it maybe once or twice a year. And if the people hunting see anything, fishy, they let me know. But if they donate it, that the appraised value of that land it counts as a donation to charity. And sometimes we just sell it, or we do a bargain sale to charity, which means we buy it for less than appraised value. And the difference between the purchase price and the appraised value is a donation to charity.
So if a guy didn't want to actually sell you the property, can you guys still step in and help, learn about the site? And is there information that you got that would be valuable to you guys to know what's here, but and not necessarily change hands?
Well, we don't do the research ourselves. If I do any excavations, I'm just usually helping somebody that's digging on one of our sites. But I can, I'm an advocate for archaeology, so I can help someone, contact the state archaeologist, see if it's been researched. A lot of people think nobody's ever been out here to see my mound, and then we find out later that, in the 20s somebody was there. Yeah. And so we can make sure it's been recorded. It has a site number. If they want it on the National Register, we can help with that. And that can get some tax benefits, I think. But, a lot of people think if something is on the National Register, it won't be destroyed, and that's not true. I've seen lots of National Register mound sites be completely flattened because it's, our thing is, well, this country is built on ownership, private property. I mean, it's yours, it's your land, and, nobody can really tell you what to do with it unless you're disturbing burials.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Greg, what you got on your mind? Look like you got a question.
The Clovis point, for rank beginners like me, the oldest point, I guess, known. Is that still true? Is it 6,000 years? There's very few of them.
Well, it's much older than
is it?
than 6,000. And there's this theory that the Clovis people, the people that made that point, about supposedly I think the Clovis first theory is that people were here in the United States about 14,000 years ago, but and they were using Clovis points or lancelet points, long, fulsome, that have a flute. They're long and narrow and have a flute, or a sort of a best way to describe it is sort of an indention on both sides, so that it could attach to a certain type of spear. But a lot of people think that's not the earliest, that there were people here before then. And that's, you will hear archaeologists argue about that and where DeSoto first saw the Mississippi River. You can see archaeologists get really ugly with each other on Clovis first and where DeSoto discovered saw the Mississippi River. But the Clovis point is generally, the earliest that we have, especially in Mississippi. I mean,
there was a Clovis here?
Oh, yeah. Clovises have been found.
How many Clovises are there? I thought there were very, very few.
Not many. I mean, I don't know. You could talk. Our paleo experts are at Mississippi State.
Gotcha. And
Mississippi State has great archaeologists, and those. But
great,
those
great everything over there.
Yeah. Derek Anderson and Shane Miller. They're at Mississippi State. They have the Paleo Indian projectile point database, and they keep up with these points. So Derek could tell you, how many Clovises have been found in Mississippi, but it's something to get excited about. One thing that got me into archaeology really was a it's not a Clovis point, it's a Coldwater point, but it's a little bit younger, but it's a paleo point. And we live on the Tallahatchie River, which when I found that, I was getting my English degree, and I took it to one of my teachers at Ole Miss, and he said, where do you live? And I said, well, I live on the Tallahatchie River. And he said, we don't find a lot of paleo points over there because that land surface is under a lot of dirt, the surface that was exposed like 9,000, 10,000 years ago. That's how old my point was. So he said, that site needs to be recorded. And so he called the state archaeologist who was based in Clarksdale at that time and said, look, this girl has a Coldwater. She lives over in southern Quitman County. You need to go record that site. And that site had not been recorded. So he came over and he looked at all my points and he gave me a site number. And for a year, I'd go right back to that site. And every point I found there, I put that same site number on it. And I'd noticed that some sites, kind of back on the bayous, not on the Tallahatchie River, didn't have pottery. But the sites that were on the Tallahatchie River, the sandy, our cotton fields, the good sandy dirt, I'd find pottery and stone. And I thought, this is different stuff. And yet the sites were separated by thousands of years. But it was a paleo point, that really got the attention of the archaeologists because it is so long ago and that's all we've got left. I mean, that one site over near Amory, that paleo site, the Hester site, it was excavated, I think, during the 70s, and we got the earliest radiocarbon date from that site. Mississippi State has gone back more recently and reopened those units, but that's still like the main Paleo-Indian site that's been excavated in Mississippi. So there's still a lot we don't know about. So those paleo sites are great.
It's so fascinating to me. We have different model cars and things, and these points, they're all over the U.S. or wherever in the world. And a motley is a motley. A Dalton is a Dalton. A turkey tail is a turkey. I mean, what did they have, a book to go by or something? I mean, how did they communicate, 400 miles away and they make identical pine tree points?
Well, a lot of it's also dictated by the game you're hunting too. And while they may have different names, a lot of times those names are just different places. Like, it's a general shape. Like they change through time. They get the ears, and the base changes. The base will straighten, and then you'll have an expanded base, and then the arrow points, the Mississippian triangular, are just little triangles, and they get smaller all over the country a lot of times. And people get hung up on these names, and it's great to be able to rattle off the name of every point, but you have to really know how it was used.
Well, tell us a little bit about this motley, because when he mentioned it, you both lit up like it was a Burger King Whopper.
It looks like a big morel mushroom to me. The cross section. It's got kind of big ears. The notches are in a particular place, and
they have
a big spear point.
Yes, yes, and those are they're related to what we call the poverty point culture.
That's in Louisiana. A lot of it is in Louisiana.
The type site is in Louisiana, in Epes, Louisiana, and it's a magnificent site. It's a World Heritage site. Yeah, if you're ever in the area, it's definitely worth a visit. It's just fantastic.
So these mound builders, this Mississippian culture, it's quite amazing, isn't it? I mean, not being from the state, I didn't really know about the mound building and so forth, and saw I think it's called the Far Mounds between here.
Yeah.
And saw it in good light. It's on the Natchez Trace, and was just blown away by how gorgeous it was. Have you guys seen that one?
Oh, yeah.
Unbelievable.
And it's not just Mississippian. I mean, Mississippian is a culture that sprang up along the Mississippi River Valley, and this was a later culture, about AD 1, about 1,000 years old. But people were building mounds as long as like 6,000 years ago, 7,000 years ago, and most of those mounds that have been dated were in Louisiana, northeast Louisiana. We have one in Mississippi. I'm sure we have more. We just haven't found them. We haven't dated them. They were used for different purposes. But the oldest mounds, I think in North America, are in Ouachita Parish, Louisiana, and that area. And
Wow.
we don't really know what those were used for, and there's so much we don't know. But mound building it's gone on, and not just in the Southeast. They're in Ohio. They're in the East. California has mounds.
Well, those folks were kind of going out about the time the Spaniards got here. Is that?
Well, they were still building mounds. The Natchez Indians were still using mounds in the 1600s when the French got
Gotcha.
there. They were some of the last, though.
Some of the
those
very
were
last to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting to think about why they did it. Are you trying to get out of the water? Or, a lot of people just have a digging instinct. We like to build things that go upwards. What do you?
Well, we build. That's what we had to build. That's what people had to build with. There's not a lot of stone. In fact, we have a license plate for the Mound Trail that says, or I think they're on billboards. It says, "We build our monuments with dirt." And it's a way of, in a lot of cases, that's where somebody important lived. If you think about it, we have our preachers in church are kind of elevated. We have people, you put people on a stage when they're doing something important, when we watch a play or something like that. So it's a way of elevating somebody important above everyone else. And that's what a lot of these mounds were for. And I think, some of the earlier ones that we haven't found the remains of structures on. These later ones we have, the Mississippian period ones, we find burned houses on them or burned structures all the time. There'd be a big structure there. We see the post holes. It would burn either intentionally or accidentally. I think a lot of times those were intentionally burned because either the person had died or, it's a cleansing ceremony and things like that.
Militarily, the high ground, too, might
Yeah.
be in a Stone Age society.
Yeah,
Be.
a lot of people think it is to get out of floods, but these sites, even in flood-prone areas, they're always on the high natural levees. They didn't build where they were going to flood. The Mississippi River flooded differently then. We didn't have these levees trying to keep it all in one course. It was allowed to flood slowly. The water rose slowly in back swamps. So they were building their villages on these high natural levees that, you couldn't get a whole village on one mound anyway. So it's more like you can think of it as a county seat. Like that's where the courthouse was. And then you have all these little farmsteads. And the important people, you go there periodically and do things. And the important people are there. You take the good parts of the deer there for an annual feast, things like that.
It might have been a little cooler up there in the summer,
So,
too.
yeah, catch the breeze.
Yeah.
So I've heard the term. There was one around here, and it was used to be a big, flat, wide farm area, and then there was this. You could even see it on them now, and I'm sure it's marked. But someone had they thought it was a ceremonial site. What would that mean if it was?
I think they're thinking about these large platform mounds where.
This is like 15 to 20 acres.
Oh, I don't know of one quite that big. A lot of times they're, there might be a ridge or an erosional remnant where there was a ridge and then a creek changed course a long time ago and it kind of cut it off. I see that in this part of the state a lot. We looked at one not too long ago, and you've just left with this big hunk of land that may have artifacts on it. And a lot of times if people see artifacts somewhere and it's high, they think, well, this was a mound. But a lot of times it was just, a campsite that was used repeatedly, which makes it no less important. When you just look at a mound site, you're getting one snapshot of. It's like looking at castles. What did the average guy live like? So those little campsites are important too. But the ceremonial mounds, a lot of people like to joke that when archaeologists don't know what something was used for, they'll say it's ceremonial. Like I don't know what that is. It was ceremonial, and so But when we say that about mounds, we just mean an important leader, probably somebody important lived there, and something significant to the people in that neighborhood was happening there.
What I've found, it's actually knowing you for a long time and knowing what kind of dirt you like. A lot of the dirt that you like and that you have hunted all your life is in major Indian old stomping grounds, I guess.
It's
would
just
be.
because it's here. I mean, we are, if I'm not mistaken, we're the Chickasaw and Choctaw, you know, whatever the line was, and it moved, and I'm sure, and they fought battles back and forth. But along the lines, territorial lines, I think there would probably be more mounds, artifacts, activities than out in the middle of something, probably, wouldn't it?
Well, remember these lines were drawn by the white surveyors.
Right.
And, and of course, generally the tribes in later time periods, they did sort of, keep separate, or when, especially hunting, you kind of keep an eye on your hunting grounds. But prehistorically, before Choctaw and what we consider Choctaw and Chickasaw and other Natchez tribes, we're all human, and so there were Indians here, thousands of years ago. We just don't consider them Choctaw or Chickasaw. It's just like if you think about us, over thousands of years, people move around, they change. I don't worship exactly the same as my ancestors 3,000 years ago. Some things are the same. I don't dress the same. Some of the foods are the same. Some of them aren't. But, when I did my DNA, and I've got a little bit of everything. And so people, we speak differently, but we do hang on to traditions. And that's how people were here as well.
What's fascinating to me is to walk in the woods with somebody that, like her, that understands or knows what they're looking at. And oftentimes you'll walk and they'll go, well, that's a mound right there. And to the untrained eye, it does not look like a mound. It's just a small little
hill.
rise or something. But once you kind of stand back and they explain, well, I think I've heard the word midden, and you realize, well, that is what that is. But it's not just this big noticeable mound like we see pictures of.
Well, it may be just a site, and a site has a midden also. When we say site, that is a place where people were, and they drop things. You can find the remains of them living there, whether it's their tools or their food remains, things like that. That may just be a site. Now, a mound would be something where people got together and intentionally went and got basket loads of dirt and piled it up. And a lot of times you need to core something to see that, put in a soil core. It takes time to put a trench in it, but you would look for basket loading, signs of basket loading.
Yeah, I've seen photos of that. And it's just different colors, all mixed together, roughly the size of a basket load.
Yeah, but a lot of these are just sites where people lived for a long period of time, and again, those are important too. Like the Clovis. When you find a Clovis point in Mississippi, it's not going to be. We don't think Clovis people were building mounds. It's what the cover of one of those magazines. Some have suggested, and they may have been, but we're just not sure yet. But generally, those were people camping. They were there for a little while, but we don't have many of those sites, and we don't know much about what they did when they stayed in certain parts of the state. So that's it's important to know where those Clovis points are found.
So I guess one other question I thought about, I've run across them hunting and been on people's places that had them and so forth. And then, there seems like there's just nothing. Maybe I'm not good at finding stuff. But then a few places, there was just stuff everywhere and like pieces of flint all over the place. And, I was just wondering, and one of my friends is just an amateur, but he is obsessed with it and studied and read for, years and years and years. And he was saying, well, some were literally like factory locations. Mm-hmm. And those are the ones that could be so rich in the stuff you can find as far as the points, because they actually made them there. There'll be a lot of them that didn't quite make it and they'll just toss them and start over. But some places are so rich with stuff and some have almost nothing.
Yeah, and there are quarry sites too, where they're at the source of the stone and they're making points, or they're getting pieces and making preforms, which is a point a few steps before it's actually got the base finished and the blade finished. But yeah, there's some archaic, and I say archaic, I mean these are the ones that are thousands of years old, and mobile hunter-gathering groups who followed animals and didn't stay in one place for a real long time. That's what you have a lot of around here in this area, and they tend to have some of the largest, most sought after by collectors points. And like when you mentioned Tibby Creek, that kind of there are a lot of sites around there. So,
Rich, yeah.
some well-known sites.
Speaking of interesting sites, the Page Ladson site in Florida, are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with that.
One of the interesting things about that, it's a scuba diver went in there in the early 70s, I guess when scuba was just kind of taking off. And he was on the Osceola River, which is a very obscure river in kind of that Big Bend area. And he started diving in that river in those sinks and came up with a mastodon tusk, it might have been a mammoth tusk, that had been worked on with stone tools. And they carbon dated that to 14,000 years, some crazy number. How accurate is the carbon dating? Do you feel good about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it does. Sometimes it depends on what the material that you're dating, but it's gotten really good. It's
Has it?
Yeah, and every now and then you'll get a date that you think something's wrong, and you're tempted to throw it out, but you can't throw it out. you just need a lot of really good, reliable dates, and it has gotten accurate. And these Florida sites that are submerged, I mean, sea level is rising. That was exposed land, 14,000 years ago, but it's underwater now.
With a mastodon living on it.
Right, yeah. And some of those sites, there's just this submerged archaeology is some of the most important and interesting archaeology. And a guy from Mississippi State was one of the editors of a recent book about some of the best documented Paleo-Indian sites that are that old. And there's a whole section on, submerged sites, because there's a lot of important information that's underwater now.
That's interesting. I want to shift it a little bit. We're all hunters here. I've always wanted to know the answer to this. Do you think that the natives were like trophy hunters, or did they oftentimes try to find the deer with the biggest antlers or the oldest deer, or is there any evidence to support any of that?
Well, I mean, we do have stories that have been passed down, that we hear from modern tribes. But yeah, again, that of course they were hunting to feed the family a lot more than we are now, so they would know when they needed to get deer for food. But also, we see the big animals represented in the art on the pottery. There's descriptions of, a big bison skull on one chief's on the front of his house, or a big deer head. I know of some places where a house or a structure has been excavated, and in one of the post holes they find a deer skull, which is that's something really important, a big deer skull. And, that's, I'm sure that was somehow to get the properties or the powers of the bear had something to do with what was going on in that structure. And that's the thing that to me is most interesting, is the reverence and the knowledge of the power of all the animals. There were animals, amphibians, things that could move in this world on land and in water, which they considered the underworld. So you see frog effigy pots a lot. Carolina's gotten me interested in swamp rabbits.
Okay.
Something that I didn't know was even around. I think we've been pretty hard on swamp rabbits, but we see rabbit effigies, and I always thought, well, these must be cottontail rabbits. And then Caroline was helping some biologists do some work on swamp rabbits at the wildlife refuge near us, and she said, Google a video of a swamp rabbit, and I did, and this thing was flying across the land, jumps in the water, swims, and then jumps out, and I was like, that's another animal that is too different. They're not doing cottontail rabbits on these pots. They're doing the swamp rabbit, because it can go from different worlds, and I was just fascinated. Now I'm all into swamp rabbit conservation. But then I saw Jimmy Carter, the video about Jimmy Carter supposedly was attacked by a swamp rabbit when he was fishing, and like his
It's an
Secret
amazing
Service.
animal.
It really is.
It's an amazing animal. And speaking of amazing animals, there's a whole megafauna thing going on in North America. And they say, I've heard people say that's why, people didn't come here. Because of the short-faced bear and the big cheetah and all that stuff. What's your theory on that?
Oh, no, people would go after those. yeah, no, they were here at the same time, and it took a lot of work and mastodons and mammoths. Of course, I think people like to think that was all they ate. They did a lot of gathering and stuff, but yeah, that didn't keep them from coming here.
Apparently Daniel Boone walked up on a salt lick in Kentucky, and there were the bones of giant beavers and things that had been gone for a long time.
Yeah, there were giant beavers and ground sloths and just all kinds of stuff. And some of that's going a little bit farther back. They weren't dinosaurs and stuff when people were running around here.
When do you think people came here to North America? Is it 14,000 years ago? Is it 25,000? Is that the great mystery?
Well, some people, I'm not quite on board with the 25,000 yet, but I do think they were probably here before 14,000. Some, I think.
Did they come from the north or the south?
Oh,
I think that's kind of an argument
that's
going
the
on right
argument.
now,
Did they
too.
come in? Oh, I think they came in different ways. Some from the coast, and then some from the north. But if I were really going to do, I'd talk to some other people, some experts before I really argued. But I tend to think that there were people here before Clovis. But we just
don't know.
We got to do more. That's why we have to
We gotta
preserve
keep
these
digging.
places.
Got to keep digging.
That's why we have to take good care of these sites so that we can.
Point.
No doubt.
So what are we not asking you? I'm sure when you were driving over here with Caroline, you thought, if these knuckleheads have got any kind of good ideas, they'll ask me this. Is there something?
These have all been great questions, and we have archaeologists have the same questions. What were they eating? A little bit of everything, and how did they? These are things that we are trying to figure out too. How did they change their environment? How did they react to it? And also, how did modern Native Americans or Indians feel about it? And they are all different. You can't just kind of pigeonhole them all into like try Indians today, because they have different languages. They have their similarities, but they're also all different. And I may ask one, what do you think we should do with this site, and another one will say something completely different. But they are very involved, and they're doing well. There are a lot of them around. I still learn from them. I used to think that I was silly. I was young and dumb as an archaeologist, and I thought we knew everything through science. And that's a first-year archaeologist thing. Most archaeologists learn pretty quick that you don't learn everything in college, and it's by talking. And I've learned a lot from them. But growing up in Mississippi, I never met a southeastern Indian, descendant of a southeastern Indian, until I was in college. And I said to my professor, I said, "Who's that Latina that you just walked out of here with?" And he looked at me and said, "That's a Chickasaw." I said, "Oh," and I was an and that's I became friends with that we're good friends now, and we just thought she thought it was really funny. I said, "What an idiot." I was there learning to be an archaeologist, and I'd never met a southeastern Indian. And I was pregnant with Caroline at the time, and she said, and I thought to myself, God, there's one of those poor pregnant trailer trash Mississippi girls. So she had me pegged. I said, well, you were wrong about me too.
That's a great story.
We laugh about it all the time.
So there were so many tribes. I'm just kind of in my mind trying to.
Do they call it tribes from?
Well, before
you had hit on that earlier.
Yeah, Europeans. When Europeans came over, that's when they started referring to these people, the people who were here, as tribes. And by then, the settlement and the population had changed a lot. There weren't many people living at these big mound sites in the Delta because of Europeans and other things too. They were fighting among themselves. There were diseases that they dealt with before Europeans got here, but Europeans certainly did not do them any favors, especially as far as disease is concerned. But there are a lot of people were kind of breaking up, fragmenting, and sort of, at least in Mississippi, sort of seeking refuge in the northeastern part of the state, sort of in the hills and the bluffs and around Tupelo. Just on the edge of the Delta is where you find some historic sites. The French established Fort St. Pierre just south of Vicksburg in, I think, 1719, and that was one of the first Europeans, and then they were down on the coast a little bit before then, and at Mobile, Old Mobile in New Orleans, and that was the first European contact. And they gave them these names, and a lot of times it was when they asked the Indians they met, "Who are you?" You know, they would screw up the answer they were given. But before then, we think of them more as cultures, Mississippian culture. And woodland, have a woodland period, which is before Mississippian, and then archaic, or the thousands of years ago, and then we have paleo,
which is even older.
Yeah, which is the oldest. So it's cultures, and then tribes after European contact, after DeSoto came through, and that's just the way we look at it. Tribes now, they often have a completely different worldview.
Sure.
There was a lapse between Navarre and De Vaca and DeSoto. It came through in the early 1500s.
Yeah. And in Mississippi, you have DeSoto coming through, and then nothing going on, at least from as far as Europeans. A little bit of trade goods would come in from Florida. There was stuff going on in Florida in between then, but we don't see many. When I say trade goods, I mean metal, glass beads, metal, things like that Europeans had and Indians here didn't have.
The horse, the Choctaw horses, all that stuff. I think there's a couple of Choctaw stables in Mississippi from the Spanish horses, which were smaller,
and
along with their
Chickasaw,
cattle.
one right here, right outside of West Point, that I keep meaning to go and see that guy and see his Chickasaw horses.
Yeah. That
And
horsepower was a great technology.
Yeah, and I can't imagine what the tribes thought when DeSoto came over here with those
They thought
horses,
they were gods.
and they found out quick they were not good. But and that's what they're finding in the group looking at these Mobile related sites. They're finding they found 9 Spanish horseshoes summer before last, which is just
wow.
When I was at a conference and I saw Jim Knight there, who's been looking for this place for his entire career, among other things. I mean, he's just, he's done a lot. And when they said we've had 9 Spanish horseshoes, I just I had tears coming. It's just, wow. And they're doing it around Starkville too,
Yeah, kind of near my house.
Yeah,
I don't know if that location is disclosed, but
it's they talk these Stark Farms complex, these sites. They're close to finding where DeSoto was in this area too, and
that's Rufus Ward his whole life.
Oh yeah. Rufus.
Yeah, he's such a great guy. He's
Rufus.
Great friends with all, but he's been looking for where he crossed Tom Bigby his whole life, and he is obsessed with.
He's
and I'm sure
so knowledgeable.
Yes, he really is.
Yeah, I'd love to get the two of y'all together on a podcast sometime.
Oh yeah,
he should be here. But we would never, and I wouldn't want to say a word if she was here with Rufus and both of them. I'd just shut up and learn.
Well, Rufus is my go-to for this part of the state. He's just he's been wonderful, and everybody that is. I think we're planning some sort of a gathering with Rufus.
Rufus could be on a Dos Equis commercial because he is one of the most interesting. He really is one of the most interesting people you'll ever meet.
Yeah, and he's an example. You've got to find the locals who know the history, who know the landowners. I mean, we couldn't do archaeology, we can do research or preservation without locals, landowners, and knowledgeable people who know the history.
Yeah, I think one of our first interactions was you calling down here looking for somebody to bush hog a site.
Lions Bluff.
Before you had some people coming in town, and we called a local bush hog person.
Yeah, that's the first thing I do for our sites is find the good local people who can help me out, and could not accomplish anything without the people that care about these places and know.
So, Ms. Jessica, Rob Burgundy has got a question for you there.
I do. You had talked about the significance of getting permission from the landowner before doing any sort of surface digging or looking. I'm from LaGrange, Tennessee, and that's a known Civil War area. And in the late 80s and early 90s, we had a real big problem with looting, people coming at night. And even when I was a kid, we would have people show up with allegedly paperwork from, I'm with the University of so-and-so, and I'm doing this research project, and I'm doing this. And we would reluctantly let them look because chances are really good that all of the really good things have kind of been found. We still find bullets and those sorts of things every now and then. But what advice would you give to a landowner, someone who's in a position to give permission to sort of vet these sorts of things, where if somebody wants to come look and wants to come try to find something or says that they're from a university, what would you do?
Well, it's funny. I've run into a lot of people who've said so-and-so came here years ago and they were from LSU and they tore the whole place up and I won't let any more archaeologists come out here. That apparently that happened a lot.
Oh, and by that way, that person who said they were from so-and-so, they weren't. They said, well, oh yeah, we'll let you see whatever we find. And we said, okay. And they scarpered. So anyway, keep going.
It's hard for me to believe anybody would have the nerve to do that, but apparently they have. You can always call your state historic preservation office. I mean, every state has a state archaeologist or state historic preservation officer, and that's their job is to help the public with things like this. And they can, usually in a couple of phone calls, they can verify whether or not
I would say
a university.
Never say anything but no. Always, unless it gets verified.
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, don't even try.
And think about liability too. That's like as landowners. That's because we're we're landowners, and you have to think about liability issues as well. So ask them about that.
Speaking of the liability side, not from just like a personal injury side, but if you give someone permission to be on your property and look for these things, and they disturb a site. They find a mound or they find something. Does any of that come back on you if you've given them permission to?
Well, it's your land, and if they do find a mound, that's between. I mean, there's no law that says they have to do anything if you give them permission.
Okay.
But ethically, that those things should belong to you unless you tell them they can have them, and unless they're disturbing human remains, and with a mound, if you're dealing with a mound, there is a good chance there could be human remains there, so it's not a good idea to allow them to dig. But do remember, if you're giving somebody permission to dig on your land and they're not a professional, they're not keeping up, they're not taking notes, they're not saying how deep something was found, or you don't just find graves, you find trash pits, you find fire hearths, you find things like that. And all the information with the artifacts is being destroyed. And even they may tear up information and find no artifacts. But because archaeologists, we're not just looking for whole points. It's features.
Everything's important.
Yeah, we can see evidence of a structure in the ground. And it's important to know if during this time period they were doing round houses or square houses or what size they were. So, that's somebody looking for an artifact could tear up things that we can get information, things we could get a radiocarbon date from.
Right. There's a lot of very knowledgeable people out there that artifact hunt, but their intentions
surface collect.
But their intentions aren't always the same. So if you've got a buddy that claims, knows what a Folsom Point and all that is, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to recommend the best way to go.
Yeah, and a lot of them are super knowledge. I mean, I know people who have spent their lives surface collecting, and there's a couple that I'll go to if I'm not sure about a point type and I have to give it a point name, and I'll call one of these artifact collectors who just surface collected. That's a lot easier than digging. When I first got interested, before I was educated, I went straight to the mound that was on our farm and stuck a shovel in it. And it was hard as a rock. It was August, and I probably got the shovel in twice and was like, forget this, I'm going back to walk in the cotton field. And thank goodness. But, but that was out of ignorance, and that's why we need to educate the public more. And so, nobody's touched that mound since then. But it's natural to want to learn more, and it's fun to find these things. And there are a lot of people who aren't professional who have studied it and know their stuff.
Well, look here. We've been going a while. We've been asking her a bunch of questions. Miss Jessica, why don't you get you a sip of coffee. And why don't we, Dudley, why don't you ask her some rapid fire questions?
Oh, okay.
We've got this thing, but you may have heard about it, where we ask you some real quick Dudley does, and it's brought to you by our friends at Springfield Armory. And Dudley does a good job with this, so you might want to ask Caroline her opinion on some of
Yeah,
it.
she may need to back you up.
Well,
a
how
little
fast
bit.
does the answer have to
Well,
be?
so you can say neither or both if
Okay.
you want, but it's just fun.
Okay. Yeah,
So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Cheese grits or regular grits?
Regular grits.
Sweet or unsweet?
Sweet.
Dirt or soil?
Oh, depends on who I'm with.
Good answer. Coyote or coyote?
Cody.
Possum or opossum?
Possum.
Hunting bucks or ducks?
Bucks.
Country music or the Delta blues?
The Delta Blues.
Pawpaw or persimmon?
Persimmon.
Indiana Jones or Lara Croft Tomb Raider?
Tomb
Raider.
Tomb Raider.
Tomb Raider.
Nice, Dudley.
So Bobby put that one on him.
Right.
You've been had, Bobby.
Probably Tomb Raider. You know it all.
And then I misread that. Lastly, Hottie Toddy or Hail State?
I'm Hale State now, actually.
All right.
A conversion.
Good call.
A conversion.
I'm a convert too.
It happens.
Now we know a little bit more
Well,
about
I mean, as you get older, enlightenment occurs with some people.
Right.
Hear,
You
hear.
got a great laugh. You really do.
Thanks.
I enjoyed listening to you. I think you enjoyed Dudley asking you those questions. So now we're going to turn it over to Rob Burgundy, who has got. We're going to ask you a trivia question, and if you get it right, one of our listeners who has left us a review will win a fabulous prize.
Okay, now this is pressure.
Now, and this one you can ask.
You
and
can
I'm
phone
gonna,
a friend on this one. Yeah.
and I'm going to go ahead and say I think you're going to know this answer, but I think there are a bunch of people in our audience that'll be like, "Oh wow, I didn't know that." So.
Okay, so this one is for Josh3415, and he left us a review on the podcast. So he said, since listening to the first episode and listening to the latest, the knowledge that y'all put out is fantastic. A lot of these episodes I've gone back and listened to multiple times, and our hunting lease looks amazing this year. So
Good for him.
Awesome.
Great review.
Thanks for leaving a review.
Yeah, so the prize that you're playing for is A Thin Green Line. It's a memoir of an undercover game warden, and we stole this one off the bookshelves of Bobby's office.
Wait, what?
Well, you need to lock your door every now and then. All right, so here's your question. In the 1980s, a museum at a Native American site was the victim of what's been called the Heist of the South, in which 264 artifacts were stolen, and only 3 of which have been recovered. The artifacts were valued at $1 million at the time. That's 2.7 today. What was the name of this site?
Moundville.
Oh wow! Right out of the gate, she
Nailed
did
it.
that, yeah.
No hesitation.
Which is in Alabama.
Yep.
Wasn't that's a fascinating story about how somebody stole all that
Oh,
stuff.
it's just it's terrible.
Oof.
It's heartbreaking. It's amazing though that 3 have been recovered. That that's pretty recent that those 3 were recovered, and I think they'll find the rest. I don't think. Well, I don't know. I've heard different things, but it's tragic, and it had to have been some sort of not an insight. Somebody had to have known what they were doing to know where all that. I mean, that's a lot of pots. That's a lot of.
Yeah, it sure is. When I found out about that story, it's just amazing. And have any of y'all been to Moundville? I'm sure you have.
I took a field trip there as a kid.
Isn't it incredible how big those mounds actually are?
I didn't know anything about the story.
Well,
I've
that
never
was-
been to Moundville.
Chief Tuscaloosa, I'm assuming.
No, he wasn't.
He wasn't?
No, he was at wherever Mobile is.
Okay.
And Moundville predates that just a little bit. Of course, it was occupied over a long period of time, but it's an amazing site, and it's definitely worth a visit. The Amtrak train if you ride Amtrak, it goes right through the site too, and it's always cool. You can look out the window and see the mound site, but it's got a nice museum, and it's on a bend in the river. It's gorgeous.
My buddy John Lieb worked there for a while.
Uncle John.
Uncle John.
Everybody loves Uncle
Who
John.
doesn't?
Yeah. Well, so with our reviewer won a prize. He can just
Yay.
get in touch with us at gamekeepers@mossyoak.com. We'll get that. I guess since it's my book, we'll get it shipped there. So.
Well, you raid my closet all the time.
I do. I'm getting a little
can't
payback.
I can't believe you even raised an eyebrow, Bobby.
I know. He kind of got mad, didn't he?
Wow.
Turnabout's fair play.
Wow.
It's rough around here, Jessica.
See that?
Yeah. So look, here's your chance. What is there anything that we needed to ask you that we didn't? Anything about the Conservancy you want to make sure you get a chance to tell?
This publication, I'm going to butt in, is amazing. I've been flipping through it, and I see no reason why somebody wouldn't want this on their coffee table right next to DU and Gamekeepers and everything else.
Dudley,
It's
what's the publication there?
American Archaeology.
It's our quarterly magazine that the Archaeological Conservancy publishes, and people who join the Conservancy for $30 a year get a copy of this. And this is how we, keep people aware of what research is being done on our sites. It covers research done in the Americas. You won't see, not that it's not interesting, but you won't see King Tut in there, or Egyptian or other archaeology in the Americas. And we also offer educational tours. Those are advertised in the back. And it's just a way for us to keep our members up to date on the research that's going on the sites that they help preserve and on other sites in the Americas as well. And it's a great publication. I think that our last one, we have an article about the mound that was donated to us recently.
Isn't it incredible to think, though, like Taxi, I'm thinking about some of your places, and Jessica, I'm sure you've got others, but if you're walking along on a spring turkey hunt and it's rained and washed away, and all of a sudden there's a head, an arrowhead or a spear, and you're you think about the last person that touched that. I mean, it could have been thousands of years ago.
Yeah, and it's a reminder that we're all just passing through.
That's a great point.
I mean, it's all temporary.
Yep.
It's a very short amount of time we spend here.
It's a great exercise in broadening yourself just a little and waking up from this sleep we're in. It's all about me. And, and the world revolves around what's going on right now, which is, when you think about just how long have we been a country? Not even 300 years?
Yeah.
And we're talking about, and then the Earth's been here, billions of years. We're only here for a second. The one observation I had that I thought was really cool, listening today, and this includes especially Dudley too, along with you, is that there's such a commonality in the origins of the emotion behind this with what we do as gamekeepers, and that's that connection with the earth. It's so common, and especially the American Indians, what I know and have learned, I hadn't studied as much as Greg and Dudley have, but is that they revered and honored that to the point of religion. And so there's just something so cool that attracts us to what we do in caring for the earth as a gamekeeper. And it's such a common emotion with exactly what we're talking about with our, the people that had this before us. And so, I mean,
well said.
Yeah. Just to point out, in your walking life, don't miss that. Just, chasing the big deer and hunting and fishing and all this stuff too. Don't lose track of that, spiritual part of what we get to do in the connection with the earth that we come from. It's just so, it's deep. I know that's a lot to say, but it reminded me of that. Your fascination with this kind of grew from that.
Yeah, we all have those moments, and I talk about this with other archaeologists. When you're outside and you're on a site, and you just all of a sudden have this moment where you think,
Big time.
"Wow," and it's quiet, and whether you're hunting or working, you're outside and you're just thinking about things. It's a therapeutic
Yes.
and it just kind of brings things into perspective. Probably one of my favorite moments I've ever had on a site. People say, "What's the best discovery? What's your favorite thing you've ever dug?"
There you go.
And for me, one of the things that was really special was I was at a mound site right outside of Tunica, and we had someone was spraying weeds, and they had taken a piece of equipment and kind of cut the toe of a mound off. And so I was out there with an archaeologist, and we were drawing the profile of the mound, and we could see the construction layers, and there was a hearth right there where somebody had been cooking. Wow. And off to another area was where they had been cleaning the hearth out, and they would go and dump the ashes. And I was drawing this little dump area, and all of a sudden a tiny charred ear of corn fell out. I mean, it was just, the other guy had gone somewhere, and I was sitting there sketching it, and it was so quiet. It was at sunset. All of a sudden this little tiny, because their maize was about the size of your little finger, and it just plopped out of the wall of this mound. And I was just, all of a sudden I thought, this is somebody's dinner from 1,300. Some woman was 1,300 years ago. And it just, for a second, I was just like, I'm so lucky to have this moment. And that's really, it's not the greatest artifact ever, but it was a special moment. And we all have those when we're outside somewhere and, just have a moment where the world is bigger than us.
Much bigger.
Well said. And she hit the nail on the head. Gratitude, heart of gratitude is what makes life go.
That's right. Doxy, I'm glad you came here today because I knew if you listened to this that you had a lot that you could relate to with it. And Jessica, you've just been, I see us having you back.
Be happy to.
We got to have
so much
with Rufus.
for coming.
Yes, absolutely.
We've
got to have Rufus.
We need to do that. And then it's...
Prepare to just sit back and listen to him, though, because he could talk your ears off.
Yeah,
He's
I believe
good.
that for sure. I do. I feel like, is there anything else you wanted, a point you wanted to make, anything else you needed to say? If not,
I don't think so. I think we've covered it all.
Well, what I wanted to make sure, I was a little nervous coming into this because I wanted to make sure we treated this subject matter with respect. Oof. And because it affects a lot of people. And I wanted our guys that listen to us to understand what might be on their property and for them to treat it with respect, but to also to watch out and not turn a blind eye and somebody steal and ravage and take from them what's been left. Because if you don't realize what's going on, or if somebody can do that to you, it's happened in a number of places. Mm-hmm. So we're just kind of trying to shine a little light on this subject matter.
It's important to remember that the people whose homeland many of us are looking after now, their descendants are still here, and it is still sacred to them, and they're counting on us to look after it and take care of it. And they visit often, and they're wonderful people, and they're happy to teach us, and they like learning from us. And so, it's important to remember that the descendants of those people are still here, and there are a lot of them, and they're great people, and these places are important to them. And it means a lot when they can come back and don't have to deal with things like looting. And, we've had to make phone calls to tribes and say, somebody dug up this burial, and, in recent times. And that's hard. That's embarrassing. It's hard to say that to people.
Sure. Dudley, you got anything to add before we close out?
I don't think so.
I'm looking at Greg.
Yeah, well, it's been beautiful and very spiritual. And thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we enjoyed having you. Why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley. Get us out of here, Rob Burgundy.
That's all right.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast. And be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.